where you're joining from today, if you want to say where you're working, or if you want to also just kind of say why you've decided to come to the networking masterclass. But do just say hello in the chat and say where you're joining from today. Great to always see everybody. And everyone will just slowly drift in, and then we'll get started. Right, I'm going to set up the screen to share. Brilliant. Hello to those who are just joining. I'm Genelle, Deputy Chair of Women in Journalism. I'm hosting the session tonight on networking. So thank you very much for coming along today. And if you just want to say in the chat where you're coming from, and also when we start the session, you can just put any questions in the Q&A box, because in the Q&A box, I can see it when I'm doing the screen sharing. I can't see the chat at the same time for some strange reason. So if you do have any questions whilst we're going along, then please put them in the Q and the A box, the box that says Q&A. Sorry, losing my words today. But hello, we'll get started, and other people I'm sure will join as we go through. So hello, I'm Genelle Aldred. I'm one of the Deputy Chairs of Women in Journalism, and we're doing a series of masterclasses. I think this is the 5th one now. We've done personal branding, we've done well-being and healthy work boundaries. We have done presenting for digital journalists and print journalists. We've done plotting your career path. And today we're doing a networking, making meaningful connections. So I'm going to get going. As I've said, I'm Genelle. I have worked as a newsreader for ITN, ITV and the BBC for over a decade. So that's kind of where I honed, hopefully, my communication skills. And also I've written a book called Communicate for Change, which is about how we can talk confidently about social justice issues. A real strong belief in the power of communication. And today's networking session is going to focus a lot on communication in all of its forms, not just kind of what we're saying, but communication in the round in terms of how we are networking. So I'm one of the Deputy Chairs of Women in Journalism. I'm also an ambassador for a charity called SANS, and I'm also a very keen golfer and also a very keen coffee drinker. So that's a little bit about me. So as I mentioned before, just if you weren't here when I said it, if you've got any questions as we go along, please put them in the Q and the A box, because for some reason, I find it hard to see the chat when I'm sharing the screen. So any questions in the Q&A box, and at the end, we'll do a bit of a longer question and answer session as well for any other questions that you have. So for me, when I think about networking and thinking about what I wanted to talk about today in this masterclass, I was really thinking about what do I think about networking. So one of the sessions that we had, a lot of people said we want to delve a bit more into this. So rather than meet in person, wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive, get the slides up and really talk about what do we think about networking, what is it, and how do we actually get the most out of it? Because for most people, there's two things around networking. One, some people don't like to network. They find it awkward and uncomfortable. And the other thing is sometimes people feel like they're putting themselves out there, but sometimes not much is actually coming back. And so this is hopefully to think about some of the things that we can do in both of those instances, and hopefully a couple of other things as well that I found useful for me in terms of my networking. Now, when I think about networking and what networking actually is I think that someone's saying that they are using this app to record the meetings and take notes. Okay, I think definitely take the notes, but maybe not the recording, if that's okay. Sorry, thank you. That's just a question that's come through. So with the safety net, the thing that I think about networking is that I think about a network, and people say, you know, your network's your net worth. But for me, the thing about networking that I found and about my network is it's absolutely been a big safety net. So whenever I've been looking for a job, looking for an opportunity, whenever I've been a bit down on my luck or on my face, I've often been able to call on my network to either get work, meet someone I want to meet, or have a connection. So when I think about why am I trying to even build this network anyway? Because some people say, well, I've got my work speaks for itself. I don't think work does speak for itself. I think we speak for our work, and our networks further amplify that we're talking about in our work that we're doing. So the first thing that I would like to say about networking, and these are kind of three probably core beliefs I have about networking, is that number one, it's a safety net. It ensures a future for you and future opportunities. Number two, I think networking is essentially about an act of generosity. So what is normally happening, or what many people are wanting from a networking exchange, is they are wanting someone who can offer them something or give them something, to do something for them, often without payment. So for me, it's not networking if you have to pay, in the same way that I don't think you shouldn't pay your mentor. Like, we have mentoring here and people pay to be a member of Widge, but you don't give your mentor any money. So for me, when I think about what is networking and what is that generosity, it's about an act of free will, and it's given freely, not necessarily for anything financial particularly, but there are other benefits to networking with people, and we'll talk about that later. But at the heart of networking is generosity. And I think one of the things that I always try to do, whether someone is wanting something from me or whether I'm wanting something from someone else, is to remember that that is an act of generosity. And so it's important for me to remember that someone's doing something for me, they don't have to. And also, it's nice when someone recognizes that you're doing something for them that you don't have to do. And so when I talk about generosity, I also want to add and then act accordingly. Because sometimes someone's come to me, it's happened to me, someone came to me, they wanted to talk to me about something, and they led the conversation with, I thought I'd come to you because, you're very good at self-promotion, but it wasn't really said in a very nice way, I would say. And that for me immediately kind of put my back up a little bit, because I was thinking, okay, you've wanted to speak to me and ask for my advice about something. And so you want to know that someone is asking and that you're giving your time and that someone is actually grateful, appreciative, and wants to connect with you genuinely. So it is an act of generosity, act accordingly. But the final thing that I think about networking, which is what I think is one of the biggest myths and why a lot of people don't enjoy networking, is that networking is often seen as a one-way street. So we're going to a networking event simply because we want something. And I think there's something about that that does feel a bit icky and that people feel often quite uncomfortable with. But I don't think that networking is a one-way street, actually. And this picture shows, everyone's like, it's that way. I think networking actually works best when it's a two-way street. Now, that two-way street might not be equal, because you might be networking with someone really powerful who could do a big thing for you. But I think there is something always going back the other way. And I'm sure you've heard of, is it, they call it, what do they call it? Upward mentoring. I think I've got that name wrong. But when someone junior mentors someone very senior, and that's because senior people don't experience a business or a newsroom as it is, they experience it at their level. So someone who's more junior in a business actually has a lot of valuable insights to offer someone who's been there a long time or who is very senior, about things like onboarding, team culture, how processes actually work in practice, and all of those kinds of things. So I think when we think about networking, not just as what we're trying to get from someone, but also the value that we have to give, it becomes a little bit less icky, in a sense that everyone has something to offer, but it might not be at the same time, and it might not be of the same magnitude, but there is always value going both ways in networking. Because why would someone be generous to someone when they don't have to be? Normally it's because it gives them something back. It gives us a good feeling. I used to work for a charity and did research into why did people give. And at the base of why people gave wasn't about necessarily always helping the problem, but it was because the person giving then felt better, as if they'd contributed to helping something. And so that can often happen in networking too. So it's not a one-way street. That generosity is also giving someone else something, whether that be giving back, giving someone an opportunity that looks like them, sounds like them, is from the same place as them. But that is a two-way street, but it is an act of generosity, and it is also a safety net to consider. So as I mentioned before, please put any questions in the Q&A box, because it's hard for me to see the chat. So if you've got questions as we go along, put them in the Q&A box and I will try to answer them, because I want to make sure that everyone gets to hear something that they need to hear today. So when we think about networking, one of the number one things that I think sometimes people forget is to have awareness in a networking situation. So sometimes when we get into a networking scenario, we might feel really self-conscious. So if you feel self-conscious, or if we go in there knowing who we want to talk to and knowing exactly what we want to ask them, actually sometimes we can forget the basics, and the basics of what facilitates a good conversation and a good connection. So one of the first things I think about networking is sometimes you can walk into a room and you can feel so self-conscious. I think that is self-awareness gone into overdrive. So you do want to be self-aware, but you don't want to be self-conscious. And because when we're self-conscious, we can tend to go into ourselves and then we worry about everything we're saying, doing, thinking. Did we drink too much wine? Did we do this? So be self-aware, aware of what you're doing, aware of where you're going. Like I have a 1 drink or a 2 drink rule at certain events, but I try not to be conscious about it if I maybe have 3. The other thing about awareness is observing what's going on around you, looking for the verbal and the non-verbal cues. So I think sometimes when people are networking, if people know who they want to talk to, often sometimes they can just make a beeline for that person. So I was in a scenario once where I was talking to someone who someone else thought was very important, and they were an important person. I thought they were important too. And someone barged into the conversation and said, "I'm really sorry," basically pushed me to the side. And then afterwards said to me, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I just really wanted to introduce them to this person. It was really important that they meet." A little few conversations go on, someone else joins. So I, just said, "Okay, that's fine." And someone said, "Oh, this is Genelle, and she's whatever I was there to do," which was not of equal importance, but what that person then found to be important. And then, of course, they wanted to have a conversation with me because now they think I'm important too. And that for me was very off-putting in terms of then having an authentic, conscious conversation with them. So observing what's going on around you is about observing who is someone already talking to, what's going on, what are the verbal and non-verbal cues, are they deep into a conversation? Because if they are, maybe now's not a great time to start a conversation with them. So I think it is about just being aware of what's going on in the room. Look for the person who's standing by themselves, especially if you're coming in cold. Sometimes when we come in, our awareness draws us to all the people who are already talking and already seem to know everyone. When actually sometimes if we look at the non-verbal cues and we're looking around, we see the person who isn't talking to anybody yet. And actually they might be a great person for us to connect with whilst we're getting warmed up into the night. And I think it's also about being appropriate for the space that you're in. In some networking scenarios, it's absolutely 100% correct to be very familiar. "Hello, darling," kiss, all of those things. And in some settings, that is absolutely not appropriate. But if you're observing what's going on around you and what's kind of happening, then you will see. And this is not about being inauthentic to yourself, because I think sometimes people can take that to be, well, I'm someone who's like a hugger. You want to be authentic to yourself, but you also just want to observe, is a lot of hugging going on today? Or maybe is it nice just to be really warm, really friendly, and maybe it's not appropriate in that space. And that's also fine. You can still be authentically you, but in a networking scenario, we are all putting our best foot forward and we're trying to feel out what's going on and then to feel out what's appropriate. It might then be appropriate to give a hug at the end of the interaction, but it's just about that awareness and observing what's happening in the space, who's in the space, what are the verbal cues, what are the non-verbal cues, and how do I fit in being myself in this scenario? Because I think once you assess those things, it even helps when you approach the people that you want to approach, that you want to speak to, just to understand the dynamics of what's going on in that evening. One of the other things that people can find quite terrifying about networking is, starting a conversation. Now, I know that sometimes when we kind of get into a space where you don't know anyone, or you might know a few people, coming in cold is very, very tricky, especially if you're not, and I don't think it's about being extroverted or introverted. I think it's about the confidence to do it. If we start with the awareness, then we see what's going on in the space. So we observe, okay, this is what's going on. This is the crowd. This is who's here. The thing about starting a conversation, what I always think is you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So it comes back to what I was saying about that person who kind of barged into my conversation and just kind of threw me out the way, because then when they want to approach me later to ask me for something, I'm maybe going to be less hesitant. So I do think that in terms of starting a conversation, timing is really important. Now, this could be someone that everyone is trying to approach, because sometimes there is like what I would call a big dog in a room, and everybody wants to talk to them. So if everyone's hovering around them, you can either play the hovering game, which sometimes is useful. You kind of stay kind of in their orbit and wait for a good moment to approach. Or sometimes actually you can go away, join another conversation, and people do move around. So I think about whether or not you want to join a gaggle of a crowd trying to attract one person's attention, almost like a stag on a hill, or do you actually want to play the long game in starting a conversation, do a bit more observing, even maybe observe the person you want to network with before you go and introduce yourself and say hello, because it might help you to feel a bit more aware of what's going on in the room and in the dynamics. Now, coming in cold in person, sometimes if I do want to meet someone and I wait for my moment, and it might be that there was a big crowd there and a few people have drifted away, the conversation doesn't seem too deep, it seems like they're fairly light and it's kind of moving on, then I'll think, okay, that's the perfect moment for me to kind of join into this conversation with a smile, kind of hear what they're talking about and join in with the flow of their conversation. Because I think that's another important thing in networking, is joining in the flow of what other people are doing, kind of going into the slipstream. If you are on a meeting like this, let's say you're on a Zoom or you're on any other chat portal, and there's someone that you want to talk to, I think actually online is a very easy way to network, because it's easy if someone says something in a meeting that you really chime with, send them a private message and be like, I really enjoyed what you've had to say. I'd love to take that up with you after, if that's okay. Most people say yes to that. If someone asked me to have a 10-minute Zoom coffee, I would always normally just say yes to that. I've got no issue with that. So I think if you're coming in cold, again, it's about assessing what's happening. If you're in person, joining in a slipstream of a conversation and kind of working your way in that way. But if it's an online thing, sending someone a message, a little quick chat, can I get your email? Can I give you my email? Always better to get someone else's email than to give them yours, because that way then you're in control of actually following up with them. But it's just about starting that conversation and getting it going, because you will need to start it if you want to make a meaningful connection. So the next thing that I think about carrying on a conversation is approach people as you would like to be approached, and have a conversation as you would like to be conversated with. Now, I think we all know that when someone's totally pandering to you, oh my gosh, that's so funny, ha ha ha, and it doesn't feel authentic and genuine, you know that you kind of want to get out of that scenario. So this is when it comes to the self-awareness, because sometimes we can feel that there's someone that's very important, or that we're there by ourselves and they're a group of people. And so we become a bit more pandering, and we don't kind of hold our confidence a little bit, or portray that confidence that we have in what we're doing. So I think it is about having a great conversation, is about doing that, but it's also about following the conversation and then leading it, because someone can't join a conversation and then immediately dictate the pace of it, because that can often seem quite strong. And sometimes when we want something, we feel like, I need to just get it in before this person walks away or they go, or I can't say what I want to say. I think the art of good networking is not thinking that you maybe have to ask now. Maybe you can ask now, but I think the art of good networking is actually getting a follow-up so that you can ask your questions, maybe in an environment where it's a one-on-one, or do it a bit more how you want to. So it's not always about getting that ask in right now. Actually, it's about building a great conversation and being someone that someone would like to be in touch with again. I think that's actually more crucial to a long-term connection than just asking a question now and getting a response. So in terms of having a great conversation, so you follow what they're saying, and then you can lead a conversation once you've followed the ebb and flow and know, okay, I could maybe take this conversation in this direction now that I've listened and interacted a little bit. And then you want to find out what they need. Now, this is in a good way, because once again, if you're the smaller fish and you're talking to a big fish, you don't want to try and make it feel like you're like, well, how can I help you today? Because actually they might be thinking, you can't help me in any way, shape or form. But finding out what someone needs in a good way is about asking questions. So this is something that I think is really, really crucial and something that people sometimes forget to do because, again, we're in that kind of adrenaline mode sometimes when we're networking. So sometimes I will ask a question like, so, what's your paper's plans for the next few months? Because that's a great question of understanding, or a great way to find out, is there some synergy here? Because better than saying, I'd love to come and work at your paper, or I'd love to come and work in your channel, or I'd love a job here, actually saying, what are you working on in the next few months? Or what do your plans look like for the election? Especially if that's an area or a topic that you actually want to get into, because once they say what they need, or once they say what they're doing or what their plans are, that's a much better in for you to say, I'm really interested in politics. I'd love to X. And so finding out what people need is not about being like, I'm here to serve. It's just more about understanding what's their vision, where are they going, what is it they're trying to do? And then if there's a chance that you can be part of that, that's a perfect thing for you. Another thing that sometimes happens is when you're having a great conversation, you're loving it, you're really connecting with this person that you want to connect with, you're having a great chat, and then someone else joins. And it can feel a bit like, oh, the best thing to do is just let people join with ease, because all conversations must end. And I think when we remember, the end goal is not to talk to this person all night. The end goal is to have a connection you can follow up with later. Actually, it's fine to allow other people into the conversation, because you don't know who that other person is. And they may be someone equally beneficial to you. You might be equally beneficial to them. And actually, we're always observing each other's behavior all the time. So if someone else comes and you kind of have a bit of a attitude about it, or you seem a bit rude or standoffish, people will notice that, because most communication is non-verbal. It's only 7% of communication is what we're saying. Most of it is body language. It's our tone. So we want to make sure that when other people join a conversation, part of having a great conversation is allowing them to also come in, follow and lead, because with a different dynamic, you also don't know where that conversation can go. And so I think it's about really having an open mind when you're networking about who's there and what you may or may not get out of it. Familiarity is another thing that can be an interesting one, because some people get quite over familiar. And I think sometimes it's good just to keep yourself on a little bit of a leash sometimes with people. So I was somewhere the other day and someone asked me if I was doing something, and I said, oh, we saw you with this guy over there. And I said, oh yeah. And it's like, oh, you're tart. Now, one, I just didn't really find it funny, but two, I think the other thing is it was just very familiar. A friend might joke with you in that way, but someone that I don't really know, I'm not expecting to have a joke with them like that. So I think it's always worth, especially if you feel that sarcasm is kind of your go-to when you're nervous. And some people do have that, because that's how some people do relate. When they feel nervous, they're either sarcastic or they kind of lean into that kind of humor. Is just to always, it's coming down to that awareness, not being self-conscious, but just being aware of what is appropriate in this space. So as I said, when it came to it might be a sarcastic banter conversation, that might be completely appropriate, but it's worth thinking, how familiar am I being with this person? I know I really want to connect with them and I'm really vibing with them, but are they really vibing with me? And so to always make sure that you're keeping yourself in that tension of awareness, of familiarity, that you're not overstepping, but also that you're not understepping, that you're not being too far out of the conversation, too aloof, when actually it might be a good moment for you to lean into the conversation, lean into a bit more warmth. But this comes down to the awareness thing of being aware of what's going on, how the conversation's going, who's in the mix. Now, sometimes someone who joins a great conversation knows that person really, really well. And we're going to talk about how you exit a situation. But if that happens, lean back. If they know each other very, very well, because it happens to me sometimes, I just lean back, lean out of the conversation, move my body away a little bit from the conversation, and sometimes join a different conversation. The other thing about networking, and please, if you've got questions or any thoughts, please put them in the Q&A box. If you put them in the chat, I can't really see them because it's hard to close and then I'm clicking all the buttons. But please put it in the Q&A box. The other thing to remember is that no one ever wins an argument. So when we're in some of these scenarios, it can be very tempting if someone says something that you think is wild. Now, if it's wild and you also think offensive, then, yes, sometimes I have said, oh, that's a bit edgy. And let someone know that I think this is not okay, and like, let's park this conversation. But if it's an argument about ideology or something else, no one ever wins an argument. And it comes back to, you're not just talking to the person you're talking to. In a networking situation, a lot of people are looking at a lot of other people. So when we get into these scenarios, you don't want to be the person that other people want to avoid, because it looks like you're aggy or, a bit tense. So that's something that I think about when you're having a great conversation. When it comes to disagreement, I try to get to as quickly as possible. I think we should just agree to disagree and kind of let that be a smile or exit the situation. But the other thing about having a great conversation is there's two things, and they're kind of dual for me. But one, be very present in the conversation. We've all networked with someone who's looking over your shoulder to see if there's someone more important than you that they can talk to. And I really try to avoid that at all costs. Now, it is natural that we're scanning the room and that we're looking around, but it's like being on a date, right? When you're on a date, you don't want the person you're on a date with looking at everyone else whilst they're talking to you. It's like, you're nice, but I bet there's better. So try to be really present in the current conversation is something that I really try to focus on. And even if I do scan, to make sure the other person knows they are holding my attention. And if you do want to exit, you can, but I try to be really present. And one way I try to be present in a current conversation, and especially if I feel like we have got nothing in common, is I try to find something. And for me, the art of a great conversation is just finding something, a gem of something that they say that you can talk to them about a little bit. Even if it's the fact that they've got a dog and you love dogs. It doesn't matter how tangential it is, because the thing about having a great conversation, it's not about hammering down the points. It's not a negotiation deal at this stage. It's about having a great conversation, and that conversation leading then to more. A bit like dating, really. But finding out what you have in common just brings some warmth to the conversation and a little bit more familiarity, which sometimes they do need. So with some people, I know that every time I see them, I talk about the same thing, because we will literally have a thing or a person or a place in common. And I will always say, oh, have you seen so-and-so lately? Because that might be all that we have. But if it's all we have and it enables it to be warm conversation, then I will stick with that. And the thing about some conversations and some networking is there's no vibe, and you don't actually really click or connect or have any synergy. And that's actually okay. It's about how do we exit that situation when it is like that. But I do think that the thing to do is to just try and find at least one thing you've got in common, even if that's introducing them to someone. So in terms of we're having the great conversation now, it's going really well, or not. And then you think, you know what, I think this is drawing to a close. One of the things that I think is some people find very hard to do is moving on and ending the conversation. And it can be a little bit awkward sometimes, especially if someone else is in full flow and you are like ready to go. But I have a little thing, always leave the party while you're still having fun. Always leave the conversation while it's still kind of flowing and interesting, because you both want to leave wanting more for that follow-up connection. So if you talk everything, there's nothing more to say, is there? So if you feel the conversation is drying up, as they sometimes do, you don't have to search for a new topic. Go with the flow and be like, you know what, it was really brilliant to go and talk. It was really brilliant to talk to you today. I'm just going to go to the bar and grab a drink. Now, for me, that is a nice way to do it, because you don't want to say, do you want a drink, if you don't want to carry on the conversation, because then that ties you into it. And you don't want to tell them not to come with you to get a drink equally, because they might want to come. So the way I always try to do is I try to do open-ended things, like I don't really like lying, so I wouldn't lie and say something that's not true. But if I do, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. And I'll go to the bathroom. I'm just going to go and get another drink. I've just seen my friend over there. I'm just going to go and say hello. And all of those things are perfectly legitimate, kind and polite ways to move away from a conversation. And if you want to talk more, which hopefully you do, that's a great point to say, can I, let's connect. Now, when it comes to exchanging and getting details, this is something that I think can sometimes be a little bit awkward, because I also think generationally people connect in different ways. So I will always start at the top with LinkedIn rather than an email or a phone number. I definitely am not one to give out my phone number, and I don't like when people ask me because it's really awkward to say no. So I always start with LinkedIn. Shall we exchange LinkedIn emails? Give people a choice, because then that's nice and easy that way, that you know that you're connecting with them on a level that they find appropriate and that works for you too. So exchange or get details. I'm just going to go to the bathroom. It's been lovely to talk to you. I'd really love to talk to you more about X. LinkedIn, email, what's the best way to like get in touch with you? And that's always a nice way to end the conversation, because they know you're not running away because you can't stand them. You're running away, you want to do something else, but also you do want to talk further. And also just move on and end it if there's no vibes. Like sometimes I've been talking to people and I would say the conversation is like really dry and there's just kind of nothing there. So then I will draw it to a close. I will move on. And I also won't do the pretense of let's connect if I'm really not feeling like we should connect. Because I think one of the best things about making a great network for yourself, it is about the connection and it is about the authenticity. And if that's just not there, we can't make fetch happen. So don't try and make fetch happen. And also, if you really feel like you really do want to connect with someone, but they really are being a bit resistant, also okay. I normally don't press the point home and don't kind of ask again or, whatever. I'd say, but really lovely to meet you. I'm just going to go wherever I'm going. And that's kind of how I tend to move on and end conversations. But the key thing about networking at one event is not to just talk to one person, it's to talk to multiple people. So although sometimes you might feel guilty because you found someone by themselves and now you're leaving them and they're still by themselves, it's still a good way to you still have to kind of move on. Sometimes if I feel like I don't want to leave someone by themselves, and it depends on what role you're playing. So if I'm at a Widge event, I would definitely don't like to leave people by themselves. So normally if I start a conversation and someone says, oh, they're a freelancer, and someone else said they're a freelancer, I say, do you know what, you must meet so-and-so. And I will take them to meet that person, introduce them, and then I will move away. Because another great part of networking is about connecting other people. And I think the best networkers are connectors. So if you can connect two people that same evening, that gives you two people who think, yeah, so-and-so introduced us, so that's great for you. And also it enables you to kind of move around the room and go to another place. Someone sent a question in the chat and they've said on the can't speak today, reciprocity, of networking, how do you articulate that as the giver? Part of my brand is that I'm sort of a friendly freelancer, and I've recently had a lot of people reach out for advice, but it's beginning to feel like free coaching. And I'm wondering how I can communicate that I'm sort of expecting something in return, not money, but maybe an opportunity or a new contact. Yeah, that is a brilliant question. So sometimes you can feel like you give a lot away in the networking exchange and there's kind of nothing coming back. I think the way I would do it is I would kind of be upfront during the conversation. So when people are asking you for stuff, or if they're asking, oh, do you know so-and-so? You either say yes or no and say, actually, do you know somewhere I'm really trying to find something out is here. And I think by doing that kind of in the immediacy of what you need, then they will understand or be something to think about, or would love to connect you, or just ask the question. Because I think the other thing about it is if you don't say what you want, then some people will just take, and that is something that happens, as we all know. So I think if you feel like you're giving a lot, it's fine to also ask the question. And I think sometimes we don't feel like we can ask because we feel like we're in the position that someone thinks we should know. But I think there's the great way to kind of shatter that illusion is just to say, hey, yeah, I'm also looking, and especially if it's like work or commissions you're looking for or particular brands, when you ask them, well, where have you worked or what have you done? Or, if when you're having a conversation back and forth, that's also a great time, I think, to articulate that you'd also like some new connections. You're always looking to build your network, and you can use those specific words. I'm always looking to build my network. So if you do know anyone here, that would be great. I'd be really open to being in touch with them. So I think those are some other ways that you can kind of articulate that as you're having the conversation. So, and please do put your questions in the chat once you, if you want to. So following up is something that I think is a critical part of networking that I think a lot of people don't do. And sometimes it's because they actually, once they've gone away and gone home and reflected on it, then they feel awkward about connecting people. Do hold on to the connection, and the only way to do that is by following up. So I would connect in whatever form you've agreed. Now, sometimes I'll say, I'm going to add you to my LinkedIn now, and I'll send you a message tomorrow. Or I'll say, I'll send you a message in the morning. I'll normally tell them what I'm going to do. I'll send you an email tomorrow, and I'll put in the link for that thing. So if you know someone also wants something from you, it's easier because then you kind of know that you can say, I'll send you that link, I'll send you that book, whatever it is that you've mentioned. But do connect and do tell them how you're going to connect. So I think that's always really useful. I think something I heard someone say the other day was, oh, I connect with people and they don't message me. I think just put the onus on yourself to be the messenger and to make sure that connection happens, especially if you are the one that is more wanting something from the other person. The other thing I think about following up that I think a lot of people don't kind of do until they need something is stay in touch even when there's no ask, and like, comment, and share their social posts. Now, these are things that I think are really easy to do. You know, if you see them write like a post or just anything on socials, either just send them a DM, be like, oh, hey, great post, really enjoyed that. You don't have to always have an ask. And I think sometimes when people stay in touch in that light touch way by sharing their posts, like with a quote, with a retweet, with a quote, liking, commenting, it keeps you on people's radar because it keeps you in their orbit. And I know that sometimes I've just commented on someone's something, they put a post out, I've commented, then they've emailed me, oh, do you know what, we're looking for a presenter or we're looking for a host. And I know they're not going to say that, but the fact I've just commented has put me top of mind. And so if you're looking for new opportunities, if you're, you've met someone and there's no kind of other real connection way, maybe you've messaged them, they haven't messaged back, it's absolutely fine just to like, comment, share, just keep in touch in a light touch way so that you are just, in the ether, and it's not kind of stalking to do that. I think that's just staying in touch in a light way. And if you can connect them with someone or something of use. That's a great way to follow up if you've said you'd do that. Now, one of the things that I think is not a great way to follow up is one, when people just add you to their email list upon getting your email. That is not a good way to follow up and stay connected. And the other thing that I think is that I'm personally not a fan of, but other people might not like it, is when someone emails me, CCs in someone else as an introduction. If I want to follow up with someone, introduce someone to someone, I will always message the other party first and say, hey, is it okay if I connect you with so-and-so? I never cold connect people because I think it's a bit lazy and it's a little bit rude and a little bit presumptuous as well that you have a relationship with someone to introduce them to someone else. So I always try to, if I'm going to connect someone, if I'm going to do all of that, is to make sure that I speak to both parties so that it's a great connection. And it's also then that the person actually emails back. Because sometimes, a bit guilty of this, I know if someone does that to me and I don't even know who this person is, what the connection is, why they're connecting us, then sometimes I just won't email, the other person won't email. It's awkward for everybody. So, but do, if you can, connect people together. And another thing I always try to do in following up is try to remember a detail from the conversation that I can weave in. Doesn't matter how long ago it was. Sometimes it's like, oh, I remember when we met, you were going to a picnic at their favorite restaurant, or whatever it was. Just say, oh, how was it? And they'd be like, oh, because most people enjoy the fact that the conversation was such that you remember something about them and that you remember a detail about the conversation, because we all, at the end of the day, in the nicest possible way, care about ourselves the most and care about what's going on in our lives as us being the center of our own universe. So when you remember something for someone, it is kind of a nice touching moment. I like when someone says, do you remember this video that you sent me ages ago? I found it really interesting. And I may not remember the video, but I'm glad they remembered that I did it, because it's nice. And it's almost like a little bit of a compliment. So I think when you're following up with people, these are some great things to do to kind of hold on to the connection in a way that is light touch, not too much, but lets people know the conversation had an impact and you remember. So someone said, how often should you stay in touch with people so you stay on their radar without being annoying when you don't have a particular conversation starter? Is every couple of months a good amount of time? Now, I would say this depends on what it is that you want. If it's something that you want in the near future, so let's say, I don't know, it's someone at a particular platform and there's a job coming up that you want to go for, so you want to kind of be top of mind, then you might want to do it every other week, just like commenting on their posts and just like so that they've got your name familiarity kind of like cropping up. And it depends on how many other people are commenting. If a lot of other people are commenting, then maybe your name might not be as visible. And I think it's about remembering it depends how visible or invisible you are on their radar. Like if you work in the same place, you might be a bit more visible. If you don't work at the same place as them, you're going to be less visible. So you would want to definitely like type out a comment that requires a reply, whether or not they do reply, but that asks kind of for a reply. If it's something like a long game, it's just someone that you think, I just want to stay connected with this person. Yeah, every couple of months, like, you know, you could just maybe every 3 months, or it depends how long game you want to go. But I would judge the amount of light touch by the distance of time till when you might think you want to speak to them again. And I think it's just, hey, you know, it was great to meet you the other day. Whether it's an update about something that you're doing, but social media posts, I genuinely think are a great way to stay in touch with people and to be on their radar, because it's not so in, and it's not that emails are invasive, but an email's then in your inbox and requires a response a bit more. But if it's like a social media post, if it's something of that nature, now I know with some people it's not possible because they don't have social media or they're not available in that way, then yeah, it's going to be an email. Hey, I met you at the thing, weave in the small detail, weave in the link, the connection point, and you will get a sense if there's no response, because sometimes people don't respond to you. And I think, you know, if you've reached out a couple of times and there's been no response, then maybe if it's only email that you have, that might not be a goer. But then if there's a job or something very specific, then yeah, then you want to get in touch. Because as people I know, if I see a certain job, I'm definitely going to be like, hey, I've seen this job. But other than that, it's just more light touch. Oh, great piece that I saw. I really enjoyed what, you know, ITV News have been doing. So it is more light touch and probably more on LinkedIn. But it depends on the situation, and it depends on how immediately you need to connect with them and what the level of that connection needs to be. But every couple of months on social media, if you like a post, you could probably do it more. You could probably do it once a month, like every 3 weeks. That would be kind of fine. But then you will gauge over time if it's a connection that's got legs, or if it's a connection that doesn't quite have legs. So I hope that's answered that question. So I want to go through a couple of like do's and don'ts that I think are things that I like to try and remember. Do be confident when you communicate. And it's about remembering that most communication is non-verbal. So don't just be confident in the words you say, be confident in how you're coming across. And I know for women, there's this thing about confidence. Sometimes people can see it as arrogant or too much, or you just gauge your level that you're comfortable with in terms of your confidence, and be confident when you communicate. I think do think about what's going on around the conversation and what you want to get out of the conversation, because we're not networking for nothing. You know, it's that safety net, it is that generosity when we need it. You know, it is kind of that helping hand, that two-way street. So what do you want to get out of any event that you go to? Is it to meet more journalists? Is it to meet more people in a certain sector? And think about how this conversation gets you closer to that. Do follow up when you say you're going to follow up. If you say you're going to message someone, do message them. And I've been guilty of it sometimes. And then when I do need something, I can't message them because I know that I didn't message them when I said that I would. So they probably think I'm flaky. So follow up when you say that you will, because it lets people know you're reliable. It just sends a certain message. Do remember that you're hoping for an act of generosity and act accordingly. You know, we can't demand that people help us. There's no one that has to help us or that should, even if we feel that way. it is an act of generosity for someone to say, I can connect with this person. I can make sure that you know when this job's coming out. I can give you this bit of work. I can commission you. If someone doesn't have to do something, it is an act of generosity. And when we are approaching, it's just that level of respect of knowing someone doesn't have to do something. And so you don't need to be a servant to them. You don't need to be like bowing down, but equally just giving that respect, that understanding that I understand that you're doing something for me that you don't have to, and I'm appropriately grateful. And I would probably call it appropriate gratitude. Be graciously upfront if you want something specific. If you've seen a job going somewhere, I'd love to go for it. Not sure if my CV is like up to scratch, and you're basically hoping that they're maybe going to help you to navigate that scenario. Be graciously upfront about it, that you want something very, very specific. But in that, also be thoughtful. I think something that I often see people do because they're nervous is they wait to talk to the person, and when the person's got their coat on leaving, that's when they try to approach them. But actually be thoughtful about that person's time, about the other people waiting to speak to them. People will remember if you are gracious and thoughtful. So if they've got a long queue of people, someone will definitely appreciate you saying, I know there's so many people that want to speak to you today. I don't want to take up all the time, but I would love to talk to you about this specific thing. Do you have 5 minutes now? Would it be better if I followed up with an email? Would it be better if I followed up on LinkedIn? Because I always appreciate when people do that to me. I think what I find hard is when people just kind of grab you and they want to get like down into furrow down deep with you, when actually there's a lot of other people who want to speak to you as well. So be thoughtful. But also in all of these things, and I think this is about the confidence when you communicate, is remember that you're also adding value wherever you go. You are bringing skills. Why would I want to be generous to someone? Normally because they've either made me smile, they seem really earnest, like they're really looking for an opportunity. I want to give back. I want to do a good deed. I want to be generous. So that person, as much as whether they believe it or not, is still adding value to me. So it's remembering that in any networking exchange, it's not just about the big fish. It's not just about that big person that has something that you want, that you're adding value to them by having this conversation with them. And because we all do like a little bit of an ego stroke, you're also probably stroking their ego in the sense that you want their advice, you want their attention. And that in and of itself, like if you've just given a talk and no one comes up to you afterwards, it can be a bit like, oh, maybe it didn't land. So if you're at an event and someone's given a talk and you go up to them and say, I really loved your talk, you are adding value to them. So I think it's always about remembering that it's not just this one-way street networking. It's a two-way thing. And although you might in the end benefit more from it, let's say, that it's not that there's no benefit in it for the other person. So I think it's always lovely to just kind of remember your value in every networking exchange. And if you don't, to keep it real, don't drag out a conversation. If it's over, let's not try and make fetch happen. Let's just find that polite way. Let's exit. Let's move on. If there's no vibes, if we're not really clicking, but they are very important. Sometimes, that's not your pathway to where you're trying to go. Don't drag it out. Just, let it be. Don't make assumptions, ask questions. And I think this is something that people often do because you assume of what someone's job is, or you assume what they do, or you assume what they're like, or we assume all kinds of things. I think the best way to get information is to ask questions. Sometimes people have assumed, I don't know, well, you just seem like you're killing it, or whatever it is. You don't know that I'm having like the worst time at work, a dry spell, nothing's going well. How's work going for you right now? Is a much better question than an assumption that either it's not good or it's really brilliant. So I think don't make assumptions, ask questions. And I think especially the more different from you someone is culturally, definitely you want to be asking questions. I think sometimes we assume that people, like, let's say, oh, well, I bet, I wonder if no one in your family's gone to university. Ask the question. How many of your, have other family members been to university? Don't even ask how many, or are you the first? Have other family members been? And then they will say, I'm the first. No, my parents have both got PhDs, are very, very clever people. Ask questions, much better than assumptions. Don't get too deep too soon. Feel a conversation out. Sometimes, for I've given a big talk and I'm feeling actually a bit tired, because you give a bit of yourself and then someone comes with something really deep and heavy. Sometimes that's a challenge. So feel a conversation out. It might be appropriate to go deep with someone. It might not be appropriate. But the feeling that you want to unburden yourself doesn't always necessarily mean that's the right person, the right scenario, the right moment. So I would just always feel a conversation out. Maybe you're being like really like not deep, and that person actually wants to have a deeper conversation with you. So feel the conversation out and feel your way through. It's that self-awareness again, not self-consciousness, but just being aware of the other person, of you, of the dynamics of the area. Don't forget that you're networking with everyone, even if you don't speak to everyone. So whether or not you think someone's unimportant and you kind of brush them away, you've networked with them, or there's been an exchange of communication, and maybe it's not been positive. So I think just remember that you don't have to be talking to people to be making an impression on them. So as you're going around, as you're in conversations, be present. Don't be the person just making a beeline for every important person and dismissing everybody else. You don't want to speak to them. Speak to people. Don't sit by yourself in the corner. Be present in that situation, because people will remember how you were. Don't take a no badly. Like sometimes you might ask someone for something and it might be a no. Like in the moment, it might be, I can't help you with that. I don't really know, or just a standoffish. Sometimes a great response can change an answer, or it can connect to the right yes. Because sometimes if you don't take it well and they realize you don't take it well, that's the end of the conversation. But sometimes if you have a great response, oh no, well, thank you. Do you know what? Thank you for being so upfront and letting me know. Sometimes they'll say, actually, I know someone. Because sometimes you just catch people at a bad moment, they're in a bad mood, so their response is not great. But your great response can actually change the answer. Or they might be like, oh, sorry, do you know what? My mind's all over. Sorry. Let me know what is it that you want. And so I think a great response can often change that. Before I was a journalist, I used to work at the airport. I used to do check-in for Virgin Atlantic. Very interesting career I've had. And when sometimes people want to sit together on the plane, and we didn't always have the seats, but there was a way of checking. But sometimes if you say, sorry, we don't have any seats together, some people would absolutely kick off and the conversation would end there. But sometimes you would say to people, really sorry, you can't sit together. And they'd be like, oh, no worries. We totally get it. The flight's really busy. There's so many people. Oh, it must be a nightmare for you today. Those are the people that I would pick up the phone for and check to see if I could get seats together, because actually their response to me, to a no, was just so understanding and kind and gracious to me that it would change my answer. And although that might not be right, that's human nature. So never take a no badly, still give a great response, still say thank you. And then often that can help you more in the direction you want to go. Don't go into networking with a closed mind. Someone I was speaking to said they were going to networking events. The person they were meant to be going with didn't show up. That can happen. But like I said, there's probably 20 other people in the room that you can talk to that you don't yet know if not, they are people that can be useful to you, or, you could meet and could expand your career in ways you haven't even thought about yet. So I always think go open, go with a yes, and don't go in thinking I didn't get to speak to this person, so therefore it was a bit of a waste of a night. Actually, there will always be someone in that room that is a great connection for you. So I think go in open. I don't know who I'm going to meet tonight, but I'm sure I'm going to meet someone useful. And I bet you that you probably do. But if you kind of think you want to meet this person, you go in quite close, and actually you can close yourself off to potential networking opportunities. And also don't assume who the most important person in the room is. I know everyone says it all the time, and they say it because it's true. You could be talking to that really important person's EA, and you could maybe not think they're important and not give them the presence, the attention, and that might have an impact on future networking or future opportunities. So don't assume that because a person's a big name, they're the most important person in the room that night. And this is why it's so important to stay open. I just try to be very level with how I speak to everyone who I'm connecting with, because you don't know who people are. And really, it's always nice to be nice in general anyway. But some of the best opportunities I've had have come out of like a really conversation that just started so randomly, and then actually you meet someone and you connect with them and you realize that they're the perfect person for you to meet that night. So I think go in open and without assumptions. There's a couple of books that I would recommend reading. These are books that I've read and that I've enjoyed. There are probably loads more, but these are just two I found useful. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, this is an old book and slightly, I don't know if my screen's going to flip that, and slightly Machiavellian, I would say, but it's an interesting book to read. That's where I got the No One Ever Wins an Argument from. It's just a really interesting book in how to communicate with people and how to have great conversations. And then this book is also a really, really good book that I like, The Four Agreements. This book is really interesting about the 4 agreements of life, which is be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. I think this book was really good for me. And I think the brilliant thing about this book that I really loved was the don't take things personally. I think when you go into networking situations, sometimes we can take it personally if the networking does not go the way that we expect it to go, but actually sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes I've had a really bad day. Sometimes I'm in a rush. I need to leave right now. I can't talk to people. And it's not that I'm shutting you down. I have my own stuff going on. And so I think when we go in with that self-awareness of some of it is not about how you are being, some of it's about the other person, but how can you be in control of things that you can be in control of, then I think that sometimes makes networking a bit easier. And the main thing that I want to end on before I take any more questions that people have got is the value that you're bringing to a network is always unique. So don't overvalue others and undervalue yourself, because you are bringing your experiences, you're bringing your network to that people, you're bringing your knowledge, you're bringing something. So yes, we want to put a high value on people that we want to network with. Yes, we want to network really well, but don't undervalue yourself in that situation. If you need to be just over grateful because they're bringing everything to you. I think when you come with that gets communicated, because communication, as I said, it's non-verbal. So when you're not putting any value on what you're bringing to a conversation, other people can see, understand, feel that. And so you want to bring that appropriate, yes, I'm looking for something from you, big fish, but also, I'm a fish and I've got, some things to bring as well. And I think that is a great way to try and to do it. So do we have any more questions? Sorry, we only had a couple of questions, but has anyone else got any questions, anything they'd like to add, to say? Please put them in to the Q&A box or raise your hand. Nope. No takers. Was it that good that there's nothing to say? No, that's absolutely fine. If you do have any questions afterwards, just drop us a oh, there is a question come in, sorry. And it will take people to type. Okay, sorry. And it's 8 o'clock. So if anyone needs to go, please do. I will keep answering the questions till they're done. Someone said, I'm quite a shy person. What's a great conversation line when you're at an event and you don't know anyone? So my opening line is always, what brings you here today? Because it doesn't assume anything. So if you ask someone, oh, what brings you here today? And then they'll tell you, and then you'll know. So it might be, oh, I'm hosting an event, or it might be, oh, my neighbor told me it was, and from that, I think that's a great conversation starter, because the answer to that will give you more to talk about. So they might just say, oh, I've just joined Widge and I was just, I don't know anyone, so I just thought I'd pop along. And then you either say, yes, me too, or no, and you will kind of do all of that. So that is what I would say is a good conversation starter. And it's really easy to remember. What brought you here today? And that's it. Say you have indeed forgotten to follow up. Any advice on language to use when you do reach out? Now, it's always an interesting one, this one, because more than likely that person hasn't been waiting for you to get in touch, if that makes sense. I think sometimes a lot of people kind of say, I'm so sorry that I haven't reached out to you. And sometimes I've forgotten all about the fact that that person said they were going to reach out to me. So sometimes I won't even have remembered. So unless it was something very, very specific, I wouldn't apologize for not reaching out, if that makes sense, because then it kind of assumes that they're waiting for you, which they may not be if you're the one that wants something from them. So I would just say, hey, I met you at this event, and say when it was, like last summer, last autumn. I'm just catching up. And I would do it like that. I think the only reason why it's good to do something when you say you're going to do it is because it shows a sense of like reliability, that I said I would text you at 10 o'clock today and I've texted you at 10 o'clock today. But if you don't do that, I wouldn't necessarily go into apology as if they were waiting for you to be in touch. But I would just use that kind of language of, I met you here, we talked about this, and then do that. What journalism networking events would you recommend other than women in journalism? I think any that you see. I think the other things that some places are harder to network than others. Talks are a great place. So if you see a talk on, I think those are great places to network, because you also have a great conversation. So there's already a conversation to have about whatever the talk was about. So, and I think it's important to think that sometimes they're not networking events, they're just events where you can network, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't necessarily always look out for networking events. I would look out for events where there are like-minded people, because there you will be able to network. There are loads of women's organizations around, like PR, Women in Film and Television, they all put events on. Go to the events and use them as networking spaces, because I think those are always brilliant. And if your newsroom, black tie awards, I'm in two minds about this as places to network. I don't actually think they're great places to network. I think they're places where people who already know each other get together and chat. However, if you want to network internally within your organization, and there's an event or an awards night dinner and they're looking for people to go, I would go if you're looking to network with management, because they will most likely be the people that go there. So that's how I would network internally. And externally, just any events that you think that you find interesting, you will find other people there that are interested, and they will be great to kind of network with. What is the best way to enter a conversation with someone who you don't know who they are, but it's likely they're quite top of their field? So you don't want to offend them because you don't know who they are. Now, it's really interesting, because there's this thing. So because I used to read the news, sometimes people say, oh, she reads the news. Someone said, oh, I've never seen you, which is a bit of a weird one, because I've never seen them either. So I always think the best, this is where following and leading the conversation is probably a good one. So sometimes I will listen to what people are saying in the conversation before I start talking. So I'll just smile and nod, sip my wine or whatever, and try to get a sense of what it is they do. I think what you don't want to ask is, so what do you actually do then? Because that can just be a bit jarring, especially if you sense they are an important person. And don't say, oh, I don't know what you do, because again, that can be quite jarring. I think you listen, and that might also be a good, so you listen to the conversation, see how the flow's going, you get a bit of a sense, pick up some stuff. Or you say to them the question of, so what's your organization working on in the next few months? And you'll get, from what they say, you'll get a sense of where they're placed in the organization or what they're doing, because either they don't know what their organization is doing, they're just following orders, so you know that they're probably not who they think you are, or they will give you, well, we're working on this, or what exciting projects have you got coming up? That's another good way to kind of find out what people do, who they are. And this is where I say, ask all the questions, because the answers to the questions will always give you a steer on the next best thing to say. But yeah, you're right. You don't go in there and say, oh, so what is it that you do? That's not maybe that bold of a question, but just ask them what they're working on, and you'll get a sense of what they're doing. And yes, the fetch analogy on conversation vibes. It's just if sometimes conversations are not happening, ditch them as soon as possible. And yet we have 3 live events coming up. We've got an event with Mary Nightingale, that's exciting. Lorraine Candy at Future Dream House, and our summer party is coming up also. And also I would love to do a live networking masterclass as well. So now we've done like the what do you call it? We've done like the bit more the deep dive, the how we're going to think about it. It'd be great to do something practical and fun. So we will have more on that. But yeah, we've got live sessions coming up as a way to practice the networking skills. So thank you for those who've commented on the session. It was brilliant to be, oh, your kids have been listening in. Oh, brilliant. Do you know what? I think you should learn to network. We should learn to network much younger, because I think it would actually ease a lot of the awkwardness around it. So I'm glad that people are listening. Do send us an email, let us know. And also, we always are trying to know. We put a link out on LinkedIn and on Instagram for you to comment on what sessions you'd like to have, because we'd love to know what you find interesting, what it is that you need, what's going to be helpful for you. So please do get in touch with us. Let us know what kind of events you want. We want to do more live events, definitely, because they are fun in a different kind of a way. But we also want to keep doing the masterclasses as well. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining. And hopefully we will see you at the next masterclass.